My name is Carl Hobert, Director of Axis of Hope, based right down Comm Ave here at the School of Education at Boston University. And it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker this evening. Professor Noam Chomsky received his PhD in linguistics in 1955 from the University of Pennsylvania. During the years 1951 to 1955, Professor Chomsky was a junior fellow of the Harvard University School of Fellows. The major theoretical viewpoints of his doctoral dissertation appeared in the monograph Syntactic Structure in 1957. This formed part of a more extensive work, The Logical Structure of Linguistic Theory, circulated in 1955 and published in 1975. Professor Chomsky joined the staff of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in 1955, and in 1961 was appointed full professor. In 1976, he was appointed Institute Professor in the Department of Linguistics and Philosophy. For over 30 years, Professor Chomsky has been a path-breaking linguist, as well as a provocative, sometimes controversial critic of American policies and politics. He has lectured at countless universities, here and abroad, and he is the recipient of numerous honorary degrees and awards. He has written and lectured widely on linguistics, on philosophy, on intellectual history, on contemporary issues, on international affairs, and on U.S. foreign policy. His most recent books include A New Generation Draws the Line, New Horizons in the Study of Language and Mind, Rogue States, 9/11, Understanding Power, On Nature and Language, Pirates and Emperors, Old and New, Chomsky on Democracy and Education, Imperial Ambitions, Failed States, Perilous Power, Interventions, Inside Lebanon, What We Say Goes, Conversations on U.S. Power in a Changing World, The Essential Chomsky, and Middle East Illusions. His forthcoming book, Hopes and Prospects, will be published in 2010. This evening's lecture by Professor Chomsky is being co-sponsored by the Boston University School of Education under the sage leadership of Dean Hardin Coleman. It's also being sponsored by Axis of Hope, a nonprofit organization collaborating with the School of Education and dedicated to improving the practice of international conflict analysis, management, and prevention in public and independent high school and middle schools in the U.S. and around the world. I was introduced to Professor Chomsky years ago by a mutual friend. As I studied and became passionate about the ideas of Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi, and began to ponder the idea of what I still to this day call educational civil disobedience in U.S. schools. Over the years, Professor Chomsky and I spoke about the preventive medicine ideas of Paul Farmer and Jim Kim and Ophelia Dahl at Partners in Health, or the bricks and mortar of schools that Greg Mortensen was working on, or the people's history of the United States idea of mutual friend Howard Zinn. Professor Chomsky's advice and guidance have helped us at Axis of Hope to carefully craft in-class, intellectual, outward-bound conflict resolution exercises to help U.S. and foreign youth learn to prevent rather than to instigate conflict. This is what we now call at Axis of Hope, preventive diplomacy. Professor Chomsky also taught me to pursue what I believed in with passion. In this case, speaking out with a diplomatically dissenting voice about the need to create the prospect for future peace by working tirelessly with youth, specifically focused upon teaching them trust, compassion, transparency, empathy, and humility as global citizens, one child at a time. To Professor Chomsky, I am greatly indebted, as I use many of his sage ideas in teaching a course called SED 214 here, Educating Global Citizens, focusing on international conflict management and prevention. Professor Chomsky's lecture this evening, being filmed by BU Productions and then placed in the archives for future viewing purposes, is entitled Obama, the Middle East and the Prospects for Peace. He will speak for 30 minutes. Following this portion of his lecture, we will open the floor to questions from the audience for 1 hour until 7:30. During the question and answer, there will be 2 Boston University students roving the auditorium with microphones. They will bring the microphones to you so that you may ask your questions. Please wait until the microphone gets to you to ask those questions. One suggestion, if you're in the balcony and you want to come down during that Q&A session, please feel free to walk down and have someone bring you a microphone. Professor Chomsky, it's an honor to welcome you here to Boston University this evening.
Well, I think a reasonable way to approach this network of problems is from the perspective of preventive diplomacy, one of your main concerns. Preventive diplomacy, of course, is also a primary concern of the Security Council of the United Nations. And in fact, it recently passed an important resolution on preventive diplomacy in the Middle East. It was late last September, the 1887, if you want to look it up on the internet. The resolution was hailed here as a major victory for President Obama and his ongoing conflict with President Ahmadinejad in Iran. And actually, if you read the resolution, you find that that's not entirely accurate. It had 2 provisions. One of them was a call for all states to refrain from the threat or use of force in their conflicts. That merely reiterates a leading element of the United Nations Charter, Article 2.24, which says states should refrain from the threat or use of force. The second part of the resolution, 1887, called on all states to resolve their conflicts within the framework of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Who is that resolution directed at? Nothing in the resolution relates to Iran. They are not engaging in the threat or use of force. And as far as anyone knows, they're staying within the framework of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. However, the resolution is directed explicitly against the 2 states that consistently and regularly do resort to force and the threat of force, namely the United States and Israel. Those are the countries that carry out aggression regularly and repeatedly, that invade other countries, occupy other countries, impose terror and violence, and they're unique in that respect. Furthermore, they are the countries that refuse to accept the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Now, of course, the United States is a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, but it backs other countries that are not and supports them in their violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. There are 3 countries that have never signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, all in the Middle East. One is Israel, one is India, South Asia, and the other is Pakistan. In all cases, they have developed their nuclear weapons programs with U.S. aid and support and continue to. And they all responded to Resolution 1887, as did the United States itself. In the case of India, it responded to the resolution calling for states to settle, to work within the Non-Proliferation Treaty by announcing quite publicly that it can now